I'm handsome.
Yeah.
Did you know that more adults get adopted in Japan than children? Or that the country sells more adult diapers than any other country in the world? Beyond the majestic landscape and modern beauty of Japan lies a history of weird practices and unusual beliefs that you won't find anywhere in the world. Join us as we show you the Japan you don't see in the media, unveiling 21 strange facts that only exist in Japan. Number 21. Sleeping on the train. While traveling on a train in Japan, it's not unusual to find a couple of people napping on the way to their destination. We're talking deep, undisturbed public sleep. And if you're from a place like New York, where the subway is probably the most dangerous place you can ever find yourself, this would look pretty weird. But in Japan, sleeping on the train is quite normal. You see, unlike other places where commuters would either get disturbed by pranksters or with half of their belongings stolen, Japanese people are extremely polite, especially to strangers. So no matter how uncomfortable the sleep may seem, these commuters don't worry about getting pranked or jumped. However, this still doesn't answer the biggest question: why do Japanese people sleep on the train? Well, the truth is most people in Japan are actually very tired, especially in cities like Tokyo. So why not catch a little rest on their way to school, work, or wherever they're headed? Then there's the fact that these commutes are usually very long, lasting up to 3 to 4 hours, so it's pretty obvious that a couple of people would get bored and doze off on the way. Generally, sleeping on the train isn't frowned upon, especially since most people in Japan prefer to mind their business, which is why it's pretty surprising that racism is legal in Japan. Number 20. No punishment for racism. You've probably seen multiple videos of Asian people calling African Americans the N-word. And though that represents only a fraction of the population, the concept of racism in Japan is very different from the rest of the world. Discriminating against people based on their nationality, ethnic origin, or the color of their skin isn't unusual in Japan. Here, employers can refuse to give jobs to foreigners, and landlords boldly deny accommodation to anyone who isn't Japanese.
Actually, most of the landlords, they don't deal with foreigners so many often.
According to the Foreign Resident Survey report from 2017, 39% of the foreigners interviewed claimed their request for a lease was denied by a real estate agent because of their background, and 25% couldn't get a job because they're not originally Japanese. It's not unusual to find businesses with signs outside their door stating that they don't serve foreigners, from restaurants to clothing stores and even nightclubs. However, it's also important to clarify that racial discrimination in Japan isn't exactly violent. So you probably won't get jumped just because you're black, but you might lose your house, job, or education opportunities. Most companies prefer to employ Japanese people, probably because of how much they love to work. Number 19. Extreme workaholism. Christmas Day 2015 was a regular joyful day around the world. But for Matsuri Takahashi, that was the day she chose to take her own life.
Strong cultural norm that you have to devote everything to the company, and you're a corporate warrior, and I think that's what really pushes people over the edge.
Jumping from her company dormitory, the 24-year-old made a final statement to punctuate a life spent working tirelessly, just like everyone else in Japan. But before she died, Takahashi had made several disturbing posts on Twitter stating that she was physically and emotionally shattered from working too hard, and clearly stating that she was going to take her own life. An investigation into her death would later reveal that she was forced to work more than 100 hours of overtime in a single month by her employer. However, the only problem is she isn't the only Japanese worker working to death. You see, the Japanese culture extremely promotes the culture of karoshi, or death from overwork, and for the past few decades, many young people have fallen into depression just because they're forced to work way too much.
夫中原敏郎は、勤務先の病院で小児科の部長になって半年後になります。長時間労働、過重労働が原因で、投身自殺しました。小児科医として当直、病院の当直を
Not all of them take their lives though. Some die from heart attacks and other severe health conditions, all of which can be traced to their work culture. Not surprisingly, this isn't the only example of cultural extremism in Japan, as even the beauty standards are pretty strange, although not in the way you'd expect. Number 18. Crooked teeth are beautiful. What does Tomomi Itano, Kanako Momota, and Masora Hino have in common? They all have crooked teeth and are considered the standard of beauty in Japan. Yaeba, a concept most Westerners aren't familiar with, but a lot of Japanese women have embraced in the past few years. Or where else in the world would crooked teeth be considered more beautiful than straight dentition? Welcome to Japan, the land of the weird and beautiful, where young women surgically alter their teeth to make them more crooked, since the men believe it makes them appear more beautiful.
かな？隣かちょっと離れたところにある2本がちょっとなんて言うんだろう、牙じゃないけど可愛らしく尖ってるのが。
Some say it's because women with crooked teeth appear almost childlike. Others believe it's a sign of youthfulness. But regardless of why they're doing it, having a snaggletooth has become the standard of beauty in Japan. Contrary to the generally acceptable standards in places like the United States or Europe, straight teeth have basically gone out of fashion, and with just a simple surgery, women can transform their perfectly polished dentition into a puppy-like, adorable version that would seem weird to the outsider. You know what else would seem weird to an outsider? Adopting a grown man. Number 17. Adult adoption. With the second highest adoption rate in the world, Japan completes about 80,000 adoption cases every year. The only problem is, most of these are men in their 20s and 30s getting adopted by rich families. Like many cultures, Japanese people pass on their family name through male heirs. So when a family only has female children, it means the family name is at the risk of disappearing. To solve this problem, most families bring in fully grown men into their families and transfer the inheritance directly to them. In other cases, once a woman marries a man, her family can easily adopt him as a son, so he can take on the family name and inheritance instead of the woman.
2 daughters. So as the eldest, I naturally wanted to become a doctor so I could help my father. The problem was I wasn't smart enough to continue studying medicine, so I gave up. Now I have no choice but to marry someone who can take over the running of the clinic.
However, some families with male children still go ahead and adopt another male child, which could be for several reasons. For one, the heir apparent to a family business might not be the best person to handle it, so the family adopts a seasoned business executive to take over once the patriarch dies. Sometimes, it could even be an employee of the business who is proven capable of handling the business better than the actual son. Of course, the son has to take this in good faith, regardless of how he feels about it, which is a good example of the Japanese two-faced culture. Number 16. False politeness. Imagine asking a co-worker to go out after work. They gladly accept the invitation, only for them to not show up. In other cultures, this would be considered rude, but Japanese people view situations like this very differently. This is where the concept of tatemae and hon comes in. Honi refers to the true intentions and feelings of a Japanese person, while tatemae is more like a facade they put up out of politeness. For example, if a person overstays their welcome at a friend's house, the friend's mom pops her head into the room around dinner time to ask the visitor if they'd like to stay for dinner. On the outside, this sounds like a kind gesture from the family, but in reality the mother is just trying to tell you it's time to leave. So the proper response isn't to actually accept the invitation. Instead, the mother expects the visitor to decline and go home immediately. As a foreigner, if a Japanese person tells you your Japanese is good, they probably think it's really bad. However, by using veiled compliments, they can easily express their true intentions without hurting your feelings in the process. But what's wilder than fake politeness? Probably being able to rent an entire family. Number 15. Renting a family. There's nothing more embarrassing than showing up at an important event alone, especially when everyone else is accompanied by their family members. So what do you do when no family member is available to accompany you to an event? Simply rent a stranger as a stand-in. This concept may appear strange to an outsider from the other side of the world, but in Japan it's incredibly common.
レンタルしたりとか、友達をレンタルしたりっていう、その困ってる人の手助けをするような会社ですね。
今のこのファミリーロマンス
From parents to siblings, to husbands, wives, and extended family members, there are no roles these actors aren't willing to play for some cash. Not surprisingly, this service isn't exactly cheap. We're talking an average of between 15,000 to 10,000 yen per person for just a few hours. To put that into perspective, that's around $150 to $300. The only advantage is you can easily select the specification you want in the rental family member, from age to body type and even fashion style. You can even pay people to be your friends for just a few hours, and because of the level of astounding performance these actors put up, the practice has become incredibly popular in Japan over the years. You know what other culture has become popular? Love hotels. Number 14. Love hotels. Forget the fancy name. Love hotels are basically short-term motels where lovers can go to spend some alone time together. Mostly open at night, these tastefully decorated rooms offer a much-needed private experience for couples who either live with their parents or roommates. However, contrary to the motel culture in other parts of the world, love hotels aren't run-down, trashy, or sleazy accommodations. They're not stigmatized, and most couples don't have to be ashamed of using them. The history of these hotels dates back to the post-war era, when young Japanese couples lived with their extended families, leaving them with few opportunities for alone time. But with love hotels, they can escape from the watchful eyes of the family members and engage in romance without interruption. Even couples on a date spend some time in love hotels, and contrary to the stigma attached to Western motels, Japanese love hotels are seen as status symbols. Speaking of strange cultures, ever heard of the weird Christmas culture in Japan? Number 13. Kentucky Fried Christmas. December 24th, the day every KFC in Japan works overtime, selling about 5 to 10 times more than regular days. Why? Because Japanese people believe the only right way to celebrate Christmas is to eat KFC. You see, although only 1% of the Japanese population identify as Christians, almost every household celebrates Christmas. To understand how they got so obsessed with KFC on Christmas Day, though, we have to travel back a couple of decades. After suffering a well-deserved economic collapse in the 1940s and 50s, following the end of the Second World War, Japan's economy started to take off. And for the first time in a very long time, the people could afford to indulge in consumer culture. This was where KFC came in. Since the United States was, and still is, a cultural powerhouse, Japanese people were very interested in American cuisine. Of all the American businesses that decided to explore the Japanese market, KFC turned out to be the most popular, with over 300 stores spread across Japan as of 1981. Thanks to their brilliant marketing, KFC created a new identity in Japan, becoming the symbol of Christmas with its Kentucky for Christmas campaign of 1974. Since then, eating KFC on Christmas Day has become an extremely popular tradition observed by the Japanese people every year. But did you also know they have a festival where grown men compete to make babies cry? Number 12. Crying Baby Festival. For the past 400 years, the Japanese people have hosted the Nakizumo Crying Baby Festival, and it's exactly what the name sounds like. According to Japanese beliefs, babies crying brings them good health and fortune in the future, while warding off any evil spirits or demons. So every year, over 100 sumo wrestlers dress up and get in the ring with babies in their arms. Whoever is able to make the baby cry first in the most gentle way possible wins. Some resort to growling, wearing scary masks, and making funny faces, but this doesn't always work as some of these babies just burst into laughter. For the outsiders, making babies cry may seem like a sadistic practice, but in Japan, it's all fun and games. Number 11. Living in isolation. Hiding away from the rest of the world sounds like a horrible way to live, but in Japan, not only is this allowed, it's even encouraged. Young men and women, faced with life's troubles, illness and depression, resort to a hermit lifestyle, alone without any social interactions. Generally known as hikikomori, this practice of self-isolation is pretty common among young adults, and sometimes lasts for a few months or a few years. But in some cases, people don't re-emerge from this period of isolation. Imagine staying in your room for decades, relying on your family to feed you, not studying, working, or interacting with the outside world. This is the reality of the young Japanese society suffering from hikikomori. According to statistics, at least 1.2% of the population are affected by this mental illness. While that may seem like a small percentage, the situation is way more widespread than anywhere in the world. You know who else doesn't associate with society freely? People with tattoos. Number 10, discrimination against tattoos. On the outside, Japan looks like a very tolerant society, except for some basic rules that essentially lock out several groups of people. For example, anyone with tattoos is forbidden from entering public baths and hot springs. And before you misunderstand this as undue discrimination, this rule isn't actually based on hate, but fear. You see, unlike in the West, tattoos in Japan sometimes indicate an association with the Yakuza or other criminal gangs. While it's true that not everyone who has a tattoo is a gang member, many people still don't want to associate with tattooed individuals out of fear. To keep gangs away from public baths, most property owners enforce this rule so as to protect the rest of the society and avoid intimidating guests. Simply put, tattoos equals gangsters, so wherever gangsters aren't allowed, other tattooed individuals may also have a hard time getting in. For a nation that's so concerned about safety though, Japanese culture seems to give children a lot of freedom. Number 9. Kid independence. Kids walking by themselves. Troops of children taking the train together without adults. These are very common sights in Japan. With their knee socks, polished pant leather shoes, and plaid jumpers, these children walk around with their backpacks, sometimes on errands, sometimes just out with their friends. Compared to the rest of the world, where most people would call the cops if they saw a child walking alone, Japan has cultivated a culture of safety, which allows kids the freedom to roam around the city without fear. We're talking about children as young as 6 or 7 years old. As a matter of fact, families would send their kids out to carry out tasks for the family, making their way to the grocery store, bakery, and back. There's even a TV show dedicated to filming the kids' first errand that has been running for the past 25 years, to show how ingrained this practice is in Japanese culture. Since Japan has a very low crime rate, many parents feel confident about sending their kids out alone without any adult supervision. Speaking of family values, did you also know that cheating is absolutely normalized in Japan? Number 8. Acceptable cheating culture. You've probably heard of the hookup bars common in Japan, but how true is this rumor that Japanese men and women cheat in their marriages? Well, the truth may actually be stranger than fiction. You see, while Japan may record some of the lowest divorce rates in the world, married people cheat at a much higher rate than elsewhere around the world. This is where the hookup bars come in. They're anonymous, won't leak their customers' information, and are so discreet that most partners never ever find out about their partner's cheating history. That is, unless they come out to tell on themselves. According to statistics from 2020, around 20% of the Japanese population confessed to cheating on their spouse in the past. A few years before that, another study placed Japan as the 7th country in which cheating is morally acceptable. For most Japanese couples, the idea that one person can meet all of your needs sounds quite unreasonable. So instead of sticking with that one person, they go out to source sexual satisfaction. This way, it isn't too uncommon to find married men with girlfriends, and vice versa, just like it's not uncommon for restaurants to display fake food. Number 7. Fake food. One rule about Japan: don't believe everything you see. Walking on the busy streets of Tokyo, you can come across dozens of windows filled with enticing and finger-licking food, from ice cream sodas to full launches. But if these meals get displayed day in, day out, why haven't they melted or spoiled? Well, that's because they're not real. And no, Japanese restaurants don't serve their customers fake meals. Instead, these fake food samples are used as decoration for the shop windows.
そういう時代背景と相まってそういう食品サンプルが普及していったということですね。
No matter how delicious they may look, they're not edible and are only there to attract more customers to the restaurant. But why do they do it? Well, what better way to get an idea of the food you're about to order than a 3D version of the meal? Since Japanese restaurants are very meticulous with their plating, the customer's order is usually the exact copy of the fake food. But if you thought displaying fake food was strange, you should check how many adult diapers are sold in Japan every year. Number 6. The rise of adult diapers. Sales of kids' diapers have been on a steady decline in Japan, and at the same time, more people are buying adult diapers. According to OG Holdings, a Japanese paper product manufacturer, the demand for children's diapers has reduced so much that they're lowering the production. Imagine going from selling 700 million diapers in 2001 to only about 400 million now. The reason for this isn't far-fetched. For one, the birth rate in Japan has reduced significantly in the past decade, all thanks to the low fertility rate and the rise in corporate culture among young Japanese couples. On the flip side, older people in their 60s are buying more diapers, accounting for 40% of all diaper sales in Japan, which isn't surprising since Japan currently has the oldest population in the world. Before we go on, here's our subscribers' pick for today. Check out this image from a hookup bar in Japan, where highly desirable young women can be seen lying around, waiting for the next married man to come by. Of all the strange facts only exists in Japan, this might actually be the weirdest. The operation of this hookup bar is so anonymous that most of these women never find out the real identity of the men who patronize these establishments, especially if they're foreigners. While places like this cannot be found in most Western countries, it's not unusual to find more than a few of them spread across several Japanese cities. As always, share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Number 5. Japan's aging population. About 1 in 10 people in Japan are now aged 80 or older. Almost a third of the population is over 65, which is around 36.23 million. What's more people blow out the 100 birthday candles in Japan than anywhere else in the world. This isn't just some fancy stats, but an actual issue that's affecting Japan in more ways than you can imagine. For one, the government has to spend more on healthcare and pensions, while the tax base continues to shrink every year. Productivity is at an all-time low, with more people leaving the workforce. And according to experts, the nation could be short of 11 million workers by 2040 if nothing is done about the birth rate. In 2022, almost half of the Japanese workers were over the age of 70. Compare this to the global statistics, where only 35% of all companies prioritize workers over the age of 55. But what's more abundant in Japan than old people? Manga. Number 4. The manga craze. It's no secret that the anime and manga industry are the main sources of income for the people of Japan, and most of their economy depends on the sector. But did you know that Japanese people use more paper for manga than toilet paper? According to several reports, over 600 categories of manga are released every month. To give you a perspective of how lucrative the industry is, back in 2020, it was valued at over 612 billion yen, which is a pretty impressive record. Obviously, the toilet paper claim doesn't really have a factual basis. But since most Japanese homes use more modern bidet toilets, which don't use paper, it doesn't seem too far-fetched. Away from manga and toilet paper, did you also know that Japan is home to the oldest hotel in the world? Number 3. The oldest hotel in the world. When you think of classic hotels, cities like Paris and Rome would naturally come to mind. But very few people know about Nishiyama Onsen Keiunkan, a Japanese resort located in Hayakawa, close to Mount Fuji. That's because the hotel has been in business since the year 705 and has been recognized as the oldest running hotel in the world. It's like a family heirloom, passed down for over 50 generations and still as active today as it was 1,300 years ago. Everyone from ancient samurai to A-list celebrities and politicians have spent the night here. And who could forget the Mochitani no Yu, the famous bath situated within the hotel? What makes this bath even more special is the fact that it's fed directly from the hot springs, which guests also drink directly from. But away from all of that, remember how cheating has been normalized in Japan? Well, that's probably because it's one of the only places where arranged marriage is still a thing. Number 2. Arranged marriage culture. Before romantic relationships became the standard way to choose a partner, Japanese men and women found their spouses through arranged miai meetings. These meetings were usually set up by a go-between known as a nakodo. This could either be a relative, a senior colleague, or simply someone in the neighborhood with a talent for matchmaking. But even though most people would rather choose their partners by themselves these days, this practice is still widely practiced across Japan. Unlike in 1930, when around 69% of couples got married through a miai, that figure has reduced to about 5.2% in recent times. For those who still want to go through this process, several businesses still provide the opportunity to find a special someone for a small fee. Some of these companies have a customer base going into tens of thousands and usually charge up to tens of thousands of yen. Speaking of marriage, did you also know that many couples in Japan don't actually live together? Number 1. Weekend marriages. Ever heard of weekend marriages? It's the new trendy arrangement that lots of young Japanese couples are opting for, and it's totally changing the culture of marriage as we know it. The idea is for couples who live and work away from each other to live in separate houses, only meeting a few days a week. Some call it weekend marriages, others call it separation marriages or shumatsukon, but it could actually be one of the major factors contributing to the low birth rate. Sure, these two people would actually be married, they might even have a kid together, but they don't have to live together like a conventional family. With more women dedicating more time to their careers, this kind of practice has become more mainstream and could be the future of marriage in Japan as we know it. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.